I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Broadway, 1947. A curtain falls, and nobody moves. Not a single person in that theater applauds. They just sit there, breathing differently than when they arrived. One critic writes the next morning, "I'm not certain what I saw, but I know I've never seen it before." He was 23. He would win 2 Oscars, rewrite the rules of acting, become a symbol larger than any man should have to carry, and then spend 30 years quietly trying to destroy all of it. The tragedy of Marlon Brando isn't that he fell. It's that he never believed he deserved the height. Welcome to The Last Applause. Subscribe. The forgotten deserve at least one witness. Fame doesn't begin at the premiere. It begins in the silences of childhood, in the rooms where something should have been given and wasn't. Omaha, Nebraska, 1924. The Brando house is warm enough. There is food. There's a father who comes home. And yet, there's a kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. Marlon Brando Sr. was not a villain. He was something more quietly damaging than that. He was a man who withheld himself completely, who looked at his youngest son, this volatile, oversensitive, ferociously alive child, and offered only the particular silence of disappointment. No achievement was enough. No gesture was returned. The boy learned early what would become the engine of every great performance he ever gave: the hunger for approval from someone emotionally unavailable. His mother, Dorothy, was the other half of the equation: theatrical, warm, luminous in a room, and an alcoholic. Some nights young Marlon would find her where she'd fallen and carry her home without making a sound, protecting her dignity the way children protect the dignity of parents who cannot protect themselves. He adored her past reason, and she loved him back in the way that people love when love and disappearance occupy the same body at the same time. Fame is often just love, redirected toward an audience large enough that it cannot leave. He was expelled from school. He was classified as a troublemaker when he was actually something more inconvenient, a boy too intelligent for the room, too feeling for the era, too alive for an institution built on obedience. His father packed him off to military academy, a last resort, a white flag dressed as discipline. He found a theater, not as an escape, as a revelation. The stage was the first place in his life where everything the world told him was wrong about himself was suddenly the point. The volatility, the sensitivity, the refusal to perform emotions he didn't genuinely feel. For the first time, his nature was not a defect. It was an instrument. He followed his sister to New York at 19. He arrived with nearly nothing. He found Stella Adler. And Adler, perhaps the only teacher who could fully see what was in front of her, taught him something that would liberate him completely. That imagination, not trauma, was the actor's true material. She didn't know yet that he would spend his life disproving this, drawing on trauma regardless, voluntarily and involuntarily, but because the wound was always closer to the surface than even he understood. She would call him the most talented human being she had ever taught. She would say this again much later, with tears in her eyes. "Some performances don't change careers, they change the air. A Streetcar Named Desire, 1947 on stage, 1951 on film, Tennessee Williams's language, Elia Kazan's direction, and at the center of it, Stanley Kowalski, a man who is all appetite and resentment, all muscle and barely suppressed fury, moving through the world like something that hasn't quite finished being formed. Every actor before Brando had played characters from the outside in. They made choices about posture and voice and gesture, and assembled a person from the architecture outward. Brando worked from the inside out, and the difference was visible in a way that audiences felt before they could articulate it. He wasn't demonstrating a human being, he was inhabiting one. The silences were the revelation. He left space inside sentences. He swallowed consonants. He paused mid-thought the way real people pause, not for dramatic effect, but because the thought was genuinely arriving as he spoke it. His voice was deep and fractured and warm in ways no acting teacher had prescribed. It sounded like a man, not a performance of a man. Post-war America was restless in ways Hollywood hadn't yet addressed. The men who came back from the war were not the cleaned-up, aspirational archetypes of the studio system. They were damaged and complicated and carrying things they had no words for. Brando walked onto the screen looking like what they felt like on the inside. The studio machine had given the world Gary Cooper, Jimmy Stewart, elegant, controlled, moral. Brando gave it something it didn't know it needed, proof that damage could be beautiful, that a man could be simultaneously broken and magnetic. That the interior life, the messy, contradictory, half-articulated interior life, was worthy of the screen. He received his first Oscar nomination. He lost. It didn't matter. A more important verdict had already come in. The audience had recognized him. And you cannot unrecognize something you have truly seen. What followed was a 5-year run that has no real equivalent in the history of American cinema. Not in terms of ambition, not in terms of range, not in terms of what it felt like to watch a man operate at the precise outer limit of human possibility and make it look like breathing. In Julius Caesar, he silenced every critic who had filed him under instinct and dismissed him as technique-less. Mark Antony's funeral oration, building from stillness to grief to rhetorical devastation, arrived not as Shakespeare being performed, but as Shakespeare being rediscovered in real time. The language found its way through him as though he were translating something true rather than reciting something memorized. The Wild One gave culture an image it still hasn't returned. The leather jacket, the motorcycle. The question was asked and answered in 4 words. He didn't create the archetype of the American rebel so much as he was it, and everything since has been imitation, including the parts that don't know they're imitating. And then, On the Waterfront, 1954, Elia Kazan, the docks of New Jersey, a broken fighter named Terry Malloy, discovering too late that he has a conscience he never planned on having. There's a scene in the back of a taxi cab. 2 brothers. A conversation that becomes a reckoning. 6 words arrive, "I could have been a contender," and they land not as a line from a script, but as a man understanding, in this very moment, in real time, what his life has cost him. The realization isn't performed. It occurs. Right there, in front of the camera. He was 30 years old. He won the Academy Award. He had built a cathedral. And Elia Kazan, the architect of their collaboration, the man who knew exactly how to unlock what Brando contained, created the conditions for it. He withheld information on set. He created genuine confusion, genuine stress, because he understood something essential. Brando didn't need direction so much as he needed permission to go somewhere that most actors were too afraid to go. When Kazan testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee and named former colleagues as communists, Brando never forgave him, not publicly, not loudly. But the warmth was gone. The compass lost its north. Some partnerships are so precise that when they end, the silence they leave behind is the shape of everything that was lost. Without Kazan, Brando drifted, not immediately, not dramatically, but with the slow, terrible certainty of a ship that has lost its navigator, still moving, still massive, but no longer pointed at anything. Here's what decline looks like from the inside. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives in a series of small decisions, a role accepted out of boredom, a director tolerated out of financial need, a performance given at 60% because 60% is still better than almost anyone else's 100, and no one seems to notice the difference. Until they do. Brando's film choices in the 1960s were baffling, not because he lacked judgment, but because he had stopped caring whether his judgment was applied. A Chaplin film that the two men made miserable for each other. Westerns that fit him like borrowed clothes. Romantic vehicles that wasted everything he had. But beneath the professional drift, something more fundamental was shifting. He'd begun to find acting embarrassing. He said so, repeatedly, publicly, with a sincerity that infuriated an industry not accustomed to being told it was trivial by its most valuable asset. He threw himself into activism, civil rights, Native American causes, with a depth and conviction that made the performances feel like interruptions, as though his real life had finally begun and the films were an obligation he was managing between the important work. The cruelty of this is that it showed on screen. Not always, but enough. An audience can feel when a man is somewhere else. And Hollywood, which runs on the perceived desire of its stars to be exactly where they are, began to reframe the narrative. The genius became the liability. The artist became an anecdote. By the end of the decade, Marlon Brando, the man who had reinvented what cinema could do with a human face, was being described in production meetings as a risk without a reward. Fame does not erode slowly. It falls all at once, and the long silence before the fall is what people later call a warning. There is a specific kind of loneliness that only the genuinely famous understand. You are surrounded at all times, and completely alone at all times. The two facts do not cancel each other out, they compound. Brando's weight became, in the public imagination, a symbol of surrender. It was actually something closer to armor. A body expanded against the world that wanted to consume him, a man making himself into something that could not easily be owned. The beauty that had opened every door was being systematically dismantled, not because he had stopped caring what he looked like, but because he had started caring, desperately, about something else, not being a commodity. The eating was also almost certainly something darker. Depression rarely announces itself. It accretes, loss upon loss, disappointment upon disappointment, check until the weight of everything that didn't become what you hoped it would be is heavier than anything you put in your body. His personal life was immense and complicated and characterized by the same pattern as everything he deeply loved, passionate engagement followed by agonized withdrawal. He had 11 children across multiple relationships. He loved them in the way that brilliant, psychologically fragmented people love, in intense, intermittent, guilt-saturated bursts that never quite added up to the sustained presence that children need. Christian, his eldest, suffered most visibly from this instability, and in 1990, the instability became a catastrophe. His son shot a man in Brando's own home. His daughter Cheyenne, who was already fracturing under the weight of her own unhappiness, descended further. Brando appeared at Christian's sentencing and wept, publicly, without managing it, without the professional distance that a lifetime in performance might have given him. He took responsibility for his failures as a father in the raw, unfiltered language of a man who had nothing left to protect. It was the most honest performance of his life. It was not a performance at all. In 1995, Cheyenne died by her own hand in Tahiti. She was 25 years old. He never fully came back from that. The man who had survived everything, an indifferent father, a broken industry, a public crucifixion of his reputation, could not survive the loss of his daughter. Something went out, something that no second act could relight. But before the silence came, the return. And the return, when it came, was nothing less than astonishing. 1972, a year that should not have been possible. Paramount didn't want him. The studio considered him finished, overpriced, overweight, overcomplicated. It was Coppola who fought for him, who saw something the accountants couldn't quantify. The screen test for The Godfather is one of cinema's great unrepeatable moments. Brando stuffed cotton in his cheeks to change his jaw's geometry. He shuffled across the room with the unhurried gravity of a man who has not needed to move quickly in decades. He dropped his voice to a whisper, because men who truly hold power don't need to raise it. He placed a cat in his lap because the cat was there and the gesture felt true. Vito Corleone. But the performance that redefined what screen authority could look like. Not volume, not force, weight. The accumulated, terrible weight of a man who has made choices he cannot unmake. The same year, Last Tango in Paris, Bertolucci. A film about grief dressed as desire. A man using intimacy as a way of avoiding himself. Brando excavating depths that most actors rope off with warning tape. Producing something so raw and so uncomfortable that audiences didn't know whether to be moved or disturbed. Both films, 1 year, from a man the industry had dismissed. Time does not diminish the truly gifted. It simply waits until the world is ready to see them differently. Later came Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, enormous, shaved, barely whispering in the darkness of a jungle that felt like the interior of a collapsing mind. When he hadn't read the source novel, Coppola read passages aloud to him. Brando improvised monologues that exist in no script. The camera filmed him the way you film a natural phenomenon, with distance and awe, and the uneasy sense that you are watching something that does not entirely belong to the world of made things. He spent his last years in seclusion. He read everything: physics, neuroscience, philosophy. He befriended Johnny Depp, he befriended Michael Jackson, and the friendship was genuine and deep, rooted in the particular understanding that passes between two people who know what it costs to have your childhood converted into a public mythology you can never outrun. He died on July 1st, 2004. Quietly, in a city that had already begun to memorialize him before he was gone. What Marlon Brando changed was not a technique. It was an assumption. The assumption that acting was about control, about the disciplined, artful management of emotion in service of a script. Brando replaced that with something terrifying and irreversible: the presence of genuine interior life, the visible existence of something happening inside the character that the character himself couldn't fully name. The gap, the permanent defining human gap, between what we say and what we feel and what we do, and the desperate, wordless way we navigate that gap every moment of our lives. He made that gap visible. He made it beautiful. And he made it impossible to unsee. Every actor who came after him has been, in some sense, in conversation with what he established. De Niro, Pacino, Nicholson, Hoffman. And through them, DiCaprio, Penn, a Depp, a direct inheritance passed hand to hand like something that cannot survive being set down. But here is what the legacy obscures. Here is the man behind the monument. He was a skilled conga drummer. He patented a device for tuning drums. He read voraciously across disciplines that had nothing to do with cinema. He built infrastructure on his Tahitian atoll with his own hands. He was in person, by every account of those who knew him at the end of his life, the most intellectually alive person in any room he entered. Curious about everything, certain of nothing, still asking questions that had no easy answers. He seemed like a god. He was a man who could not make his father love him. He seemed like a rebel. He was a child who had learned too early that love and abandonment can live in the same body. And he seemed indifferent to his legacy. He was someone who had wanted, from the very beginning, only to be genuinely seen, and had spent his entire life uncertain whether the world was looking at him or at the image it had made of him. Stella Adler said it best, near the end, that he was the only student she ever taught who fully realized everything she had hoped for in the craft, and that the tragedy, if it was one, was that he realized it so young and so completely that the rest of his life became a long, slow negotiation with an altitude no human being was designed to sustain. So I leave you with the question that sits at the center of everything. Was Marlon Brando a man destroyed by the thing he was best at? Or was he the only one who ever understood the cost before he paid it, and paid it anyway? Was he a fallen star? Or was he the proof that the fall is the point, that the only lives worth telling are the ones that burned high enough to leave a mark on the dark? He wanted one thing. Not the Oscars, not mythology, not the leather jacket on 1,000 walls, or the whisper that became the voice of an American century. He wanted a father to look at him and see something worth seeing. So he gave that look to the entire world, and spent the rest of his life wondering why it still wasn't enough. That is the last applause, the sound that fills the dark after the lights go down, after the curtain falls, after the audience has gone home. The sound that a man hears alone in a quiet room, when the only verdict that ever mattered was the one that was never given. If Brando's story found something in you, if there's another name, another life, another face that deserves to be remembered this way, leave it below. We'll be there, in the dark, where all the real stories begin.